welcome to the Gio and Joey Show. It's been a while since we went live. I'm a busy man sometimes, and so the last couple of weeks it was Thanksgiving, and I had work-related stuff. Anyway, Joey, how you doing? Tell the audience what we're going to be talking tonight.
Well, I'm doing better than I deserve. So yeah, I got a little bit of a bee in my bonnet lately about quietism, Christian quietists who think
Wait a
that we
minute,
should.
real quick. The bee in the bonnet is not eternal conscious torment. That's been trending on.
Well,
No,
but that's good news. I saw your stream that you did here. That was good,
yeah.
and I love seeing Mike Deaver come out. Isn't that his name on the show? Mike Deaver? No, Kirk
No, who you?
Cameron. Who did he play on Growing Pains?
Oh, I don't remember.
Wasn't it Mike Deaver?
No, Well,
No,
I'll
that
look it
name's
up
somebody.
here, but it wasn't that. I don't think
Oh.
so. Well, anyway.
But
So
anyway,
go
I
ahead.
just thought that was good news. I like that.
Yeah. All right. So set it up. Where are we starting with the video first, or something else?
No, we'll go in that order that I sent you the stuff. So we'll go through the
Okay.
text. No, actually, I scrapped that. Let's do the video first because we'll just do a short clip out of that.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the videotape.
Nobody can say we're not authentic.
Yeah. How long are we going with the video?
So start. It's not super long. Start at 11:05, and then
Okay.
I'll do this or something.
Okay. Yeah.
What I want to explore with you because it needs to be addressed. The fact is, if there are 22 million Seventh-day Adventists worldwide, this is an abysmal number with 8 billion plus humans on the planet. Most people on planet Earth have never heard of us. We don't figure into anybody's equations. Nobody is asking our opinion about anything. When conversations are had on the stage of the world politics and economics and art, we don't figure in. Nobody's curious about what we think because most people don't even know that we exist as a denomination. So 22 million is not a large number. It's not. Elon Musk has more followers than the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The fact is, we are not a significant force to be reckoned with. Now, hold that in your mind for a moment. Hold that in your mind for a moment, parallel to the claims that we make. That we're about to give the loud cry. The whole earth is about to be lightened with the glory of what we have to say, and it's going to be global, and everybody's going to encounter what Adventists have to say. I don't know. So here's the thing. That David Trim guy, I got on the phone with him about a year ago, and I said, hey, so I want to read everything you have on this website, but it's a lot. Could you just tell me the truth of the situation? Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, that's good. That clip, that kind of jarring clip, that's what I wanted. So, and also I will say, elsewhere in the sermon, he rightly pointed out, all evangelical Protestant churches, all churches, right, are either stabilized or declining, and they're all declined from their high. But I thought one of the points you made is that, like, most people, like, a lot of times, we'll talk, and about the importance of these truths and spreading them. And then at the end of the day, most of our conversations are insular, right? And like, it's two Adventists and, you know what I mean? Or two Christians.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir.
And one of the reasons why I thought of that in the context of the verses that I shared with you and some of the other things is because I don't believe that's always been true. I believe our pioneers, because they understood the importance of speaking truth in the public square, they did make a big dent and punch above their weight, both on the issue of religious liberty. When you actually look at the influence that Seventh-day Adventists had in America in preserving religious liberty, it's immense. I mean, obviously we know A.T. Jones, right, went to the Senate, but a lot of stuff and infrastructure had to be built in relationships, right, that got it. So people knew about A.T. Jones. The other thing is, and obviously this is in order, but like one of the things is, like, a lot of people don't know necessarily because we don't talk about this history as much, but the abolition movement, right? Adventists were very well known in the anti-slavery movement, right? So well known, Frederick Douglass, everyone knows who he is, has spoke in Adventist churches and gatherings, right, on the cause of abolition, and his daughter became a Seventh-day Adventist and was a prominent Seventh-day Adventist leader in New York.
It's funny you mentioned Frederick Douglas because my wife is reading a history book and she saw a quote about him in Adventism that she was pleasantly surprised to see. So that's cool that you bring that up now.
Yeah, and also I don't know if you're familiar with the Matthew McConaughey movie from the mid 2000s called Free State of Jones.
Mm-mm.
So it's about this guy. He deserted. So he was in Mississippi during the Civil War. His name was Newton Knight. He deserted he had been drafted into the Confederate Army. He deserted. He winds up finding this colony in the middle of Mississippi called the Free State of Jones, where they had former slaves. So people ended up marrying a former slave, and it was basically this free community. Well, so he was like this huge like pro civil rights figure in the middle of Confederate Mississippi. Well, one of his daughters is this woman by the name of Anna Knight, who was one of the first Seventh-day Adventist teachers in our schools,
Mm-hmm.
right? Almost certainly drawn to Adventism because our pioneers were fearless about speaking truth in the public square on a key moral issue of their time. There's more Sojourner Truth. Everyone knows her from her
Yes.
work
Mm-hmm.
the Underground Railroad. She was like besties with Ellen White, so much so there are conflicting reports about whether or not she was ever baptized in the Adventist Church.
Yeah.
We know that she attended quite often and would speak at gatherings, and we know she was friends with Mrs. White. That's not contended. Whether she was actually baptized, that is. But I'll tell you this: she is buried in the Battle Creek, Michigan
Yes.
cemetery,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of those pioneers are buried.
Yeah,
And my point in bringing that up is just we have not always been afraid of speaking truth on, like, yes, because this is one of the things that I'll see sometimes is some Adventists say, well, our message is the Sabbath. Well, I think the Sabbath is very important. I think it's crucially important. I think it's going to be really important for the end times. But to say our message is the Sabbath or the sanctuary or this and that, and like for me, I can't even understand that worldview that just takes uh, positions and it's like this is what the position is. But at the end of the day, the sanctuary message, like it's about what Jesus is doing to get rid of sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sabbath breaking is not the only sin, right?
Yeah.
It's not the only injustice. And so you just, as Christians, you have to be a full circuit. I don't know what the word I'm exactly.
Yeah, holistic. You have to be. Yeah, you have to be holistic in everything. Why do you think our voice in the public square has been muted?
I mean, I think there's with everything, there's multiple reasons. One, I think we've become disconnected from, well, like all Americans, we're disconnected from like American history. We're disconnected from history and, philosophy and these things, right? So in other words, now, at least when it comes to issues like abortion or transgenderism, because we rightfully call out the excess of certain people on the religious right, not all religious right people,
Mm-hmm.
but certain ones who want to go into, actual religious tyranny, right? Trampling on the first four commandments. Because we stand against that, there's a certain group of people who within Adventism who then say, well, if those people are against abortion, well, we want to make sure we're standing against those people. And I'm just like, that's just backwards thinking, right? Like, we should be for and justice. And at the end of the day, and this is going to maybe, and we don't have time for this tonight, but maybe sometime we just need to do a deep dive comparing the political philosophy of A.T. Jones, our Adventist religious pioneer, with Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln. Because I think when people actually understand that through line, it'll make it easier to know what to defend and what not to defend politically. Because A.T. Jones and Ellen White both came out, and they for an Adventist, obviously the more authoritative one is Mrs. White. We also respect A.T. Jones. A.T. Jones just said it succinctly: the United States Declaration of Independence is the most perfect principle of civil government ever to be articulated. Mrs. White said, not quite, I mean, it was more long-winded, but she said that grand old document, the Declaration of Independence, and I don't want to butcher the quote, but very praiseworthy. And then when you look at Abraham Lincoln, right, there are certain things in his writing, I'm like, did he just copy Mrs. White? Right? Like, when the prophetic significance of the war, and even at one point said, God, I hope this terrible war ends. I wonder if Almighty God, in His providence, is allowing every drop taken with the lash to be taken with the sword, or something to that effect. Right, very much seeing providence in the war, and I don't know how far I want because I could just go down a rabbit hole on this.
Well, no, but look. Well, go ahead. Well, here's the thing. Let's dive into these Bible verses because I saw some of them, and then I'm going to.
And we'll be.
Yeah, then I'm going to drop to you a proposition that goes along with this. I had a conversation with another pastor this morning concerning this, and now this is not a stand I'm taking, but a rabbit hole I'm chasing. Right. So there's a difference, right? I'm exploring. And it's going to be interesting. But let's look at some of these Bible verses, and you tell me. Well, the first one is 16 verses. Are we going to go through all of them real quick?
Was that the longest one?
Yeah. Yeah, let's go.
So I know towards the end is the main part, towards verse 14. But I guess I just put the rest.
All right. Let's start. This is from Isaiah. And it says, I'm using accordance and I'm reading the New American Standard Bible. It says, behold, the Lord's hand is not short that it cannot save, nor his ear so dull that it cannot hear. For your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. I like this verse, and I don't know what angle you're taking on it, but the reason I like this verse, it shows you that we can't be living in violation of God's laws and expect him to bless us. And I remember you quoted Abraham Lincoln, of how, his thoughts on the Civil War. Well, one of the famous ones is, right, when they ask him, and I'm paraphrasing about, is God on our side? And he's like, I'm not worried about if God is on our side or on their side. I'm worried are we on God's side, right? And so this, verses here show us that God doesn't always, quote unquote, have our back if we're living in rebellion against him. And this, clearly states it, right? But your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken falsehood, and your tongue mutters wickedness. And not to get into, party politics, but all these politicians, man, left and right, who lie, who cheat, who scam, you wonder why the nation is suffering or going down the tubes from its ideals. It's because you have all these things taking place that we just read. Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, no, I totally agree. And now it's coming back to me why I put so many verses, because the end, so the beginning kind of talks about the problem, and then I think it's in verse 14 where it starts
jump there.
Why that they got so sorry, in such a sorry state.
All right, so let me read 14.
Yeah.
Justice is turned back and righteousness stands far away, for truth has stumbled in the street and uprightness cannot enter. Yes, truth is lacking, and he who turns aside from evil makes himself a prey. Now the Lord saw, and it was displeasing in his sight that there was no justice, and he saw that there was no man, and was astonished that there was no one to intercede. Then his own arm brought salvation to him, and his righteousness upheld him. Yeah, no doubt, right?
And then we're getting into the solution.
Yeah, no, but that's where you and I have to be able to speak not just on religious matters, but on matters that are practical. that that help people to think clearly through the legislations that go before us. And this is not championing party politics, but we have to be able to know how to defend in the public square truth, whether it's overtly stated in scripture or whether it's just true from natural law.
Yeah, and verse 14 I think was key to the problem. And it's what I think we need to take into consideration, right? Where it says truth, right, stumbled in the public square. Well,
Mm-hmm.
who is it that God is tasked? Well, certainly, in Isaiah's context, right, it was Israel. But what was
Mm-hmm.
Israel? Israel was just God's corporate body, right,
Yep.
before the broader church in the New Testament became his corporate body, right? And so because God's people did not do their job of proclaiming the truth, right? And to our context, right? For those of us, right, Christians who believe in religious liberty, separation of church and state, right, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all these things. Well, the American founders were clear that a free society required a citizenry that chose, morality, right? It was a
Religious
moral.
and moral principles.
And part of the reason, so the church is free, right? We have a free church in America, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the disestablishment clause. That means that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. So that means that the church is free from the government, right? And part of that is so that the government doesn't corrupt the church, right? And then the other part of that is so that the church doesn't use the power of the state to persecute. And that's all very true. But part of it, and this is why, and we need it, like as Christians who believe in liberty, we all need to go back and reread John Locke, right, and understand the social compact theory. Because in the whole scheme of ideas of like people talking about like a regime change or whatever, right, when you have the post-liberal right, these are the people who kind of, they want a more robust state, including in church matters, on the right, or you have Marxists on the left, right? These are both divergences from the American founding, right? Of ordered liberty, right? Where you have, natural law, but you're not using the state to persecute dissenters and these things. Well, that all comes in large part from John Locke and his social compact
Mm-hmm.
theory. But the social compact theory includes, right? It is not just our rights. It is also the duties that we agree to. And one of those duties is that intermediary institutions like the free church, they owe something to society. And that is, you need to preach the truth, right? You need to, right? Churches are vital to a free society, right? Because if everyone in society becomes irreligious and they don't care about right and wrong, well, anarchy ensues and you're going to get a big government state, right? And you're going to lose the constitutional order through anarchy.
Yeah,
And
but
the
hold on,
church,
hold on. Well, go ahead. Because I really
well,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, the church can help avert that if it's doing its job of disciple making, right? Because if you are a good Christian, right, and you've learned what is right, well, society can generally function. And I think, by the way, I'm a religious freedom absolutist, right? I think the other Abrahamic religions can make good citizens too. I would say in certain cases, right, we need to.
Okay. All right, good. You brought it up. So let's go
Because in
here.
Judeo-Christian religions, I think it's more universally okay. But I would say this: Muslims can be good Americans, but
Okay, hold on. Let me bring it up, right? So this is what I was having a discussion with, and I preface this with saying this is something I'm exploring. It's a rabbit hole I'm going down, which by that I mean I'm not ready to make it a definitive statement on it yet. But we're having a conversation, and you brought up this topic, and it fits. So you look at what's happening in your state, Dearborn, Michigan. And you look at what's happening in Minnesota with the Somali and Muslim population and the fraud and all that stuff. Obviously, everybody deserves their day in court. And if you're found guilty, well, the consequences are that. But you and I know what many imams teach, that Islam is going to conquer the world, including infidel America has to fall. At what point, and you and I believe in religious liberty, but what we do not believe in is a combination of church and state, right? And sometimes you and we preach and we think prophetically speaking that there will be a union of apostate Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, a union of church and state. Are we being delusional, or are we being short-sighted to not to see that same threat coming from Islam? I mean, in Dearborn, Michigan, they practice Sharia law. In Dearborn, Michigan, there are calls to prayer out loud. Imagine if Christians were doing that. Calls to prayer 5 times a day. Are we letting them slide by basically letting them mix church and state? And you and I well know, if they were governors of all 50 states and mayors of all cities, major cities, and the president, they would erode our freedoms. How can I say that? Look at every Muslim country. You and I go there, we couldn't have this show in Muslim countries. We couldn't have the freedoms we have. So are we turning a blind eye and not being watchmen on the wall for what's happening? And so then the question becomes, what do you do about it? Because religiously, they should be allowed to worship as liberty of conscience. But they're not strictly a religion. They are a mixture of church and state. Where do you draw the line? And that's the rabbit hole I'm going down. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's a complex subject. I mean, I would say this, right? Well, for one, if there's any, listen, I've had friends who are American Muslims, people who don't want to impose, right? So I know that there exists westernized Muslims, right, who are good citizens who just want to practice their faith. And
okay, but let me stop you there real quick. But that's Muslim citizens. What you hear from clerks and when you hear from those who do get into power, it's a different story.
Well, I mean, I guess it would just depend. I mean, it would depend on the individual, is what I would say. But what I would say the solution is obviously for American citizens, right? You know, the First Amendment, obviously. I mean, the First Amendment applies to it applies within reason to anyone. I want to be very clear about that. That's one thing that people have started to say about, like, well, we don't need to care about, these rights. Now, there are certain things in the Constitution that are privileges of immunities. I'm probably not getting the legal term right, but basically privileges of citizenship, right? Things like voting and these things. But the rights, actually, those aren't privileges of citizenship, right? Those are things, and that's what it's important about. That's important about the natural law basis. Those are things that we say that people have, right? So religious freedom would be one of those things. But religious freedom, and this is one of the things that, so recently, I mean, Tucker Carlson has been, actually, Tucker Carlson's been kind of friendly to the Muslims lately. But a lot of people on kind of the post-liberal right, one of the things they'll say is they'll point to the fact that, well, Muslims, in Muslim countries, they believe in female genital mutilation, or Muslim countries have honor killings, or all these things. They said, so these people aren't compatible with, American constitutional law. Well, here's the thing, though. Religious liberty law does not protect honor killings, right? It does not protect female genital mutilation, right? And so our law...
Okay, hold on. But, pushing back here as I go down the rabbit hole, you're right. Constitutional law doesn't protect that. In other words, the famous peyote case, right, with Scalia back in the early 1990s.
I actually disagree with Scalia on that one.
Yeah, so do I. But that was a famous case that set precedent. However, if they're in power, they can change that. Imagine every state. Hold on. Because I'm going in the future. If every governor was Muslim, then they would have the 2/3 to make constitutional amendments. That's the point I'm trying to say. At what point does Islam stop being a religion and it starts being a conquering, invading army because they don't separate church and state. Just look at all their countries. That is not an option. And so right now they seem like the minority, but look what's happened to England. Go ahead.
I would say, and this is another thing I've heard people talk about, I actually don't think that in the United States now in England, yes, it is. I mean, but we generally, the migrants that we get, I mean, Muslim, and I was actually just reading a stat on this. Muslims still make up like less than 1%, or like it's like 1% of America, right? We do not have like when we have like mass immigration and even illegal immigration, it's generally from like Catholic countries, right? Right, it's Latin America, right? And so I don't really think that we're on anywhere close to that.
Neither do I. But I'm talking about the future. And forget the future. What about like look at Dearborn, where Sharia law is actually practiced.
I would bring up the Dearborn thing because I see a lot of stuff online. Now, here's what I am against. Like after October 7, there was a rally and there was people, and many of them weren't citizens, who were shouting like "Death to America." I have no problem with people who are not citizens having their visa revoked. Right, student. I mean, listen. At my school, and this person wasn't Muslim; they were Christian. But there was I don't know if I should tell this story. Well, I started, so I got to finish now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give any names. But someone who was here on a student visa basically was complaining about America and, America this and America that. And I'm like, you took the student visa. It's like, if that's how you feel, you should live by your convictions and leave. And we should probably take it from you, right? Is what I basically said. It's like, yeah, we don't have a duty to allow everyone to come here. We're allowed to have orderly immigration laws. And so, and some of that stuff I would say. But as far as like Sharia law being practiced in Dearborn, I mean, I live in Michigan. I know people near Detroit. I don't know that that's actually the case, right? Like now, Muslims in their own lives, they may, practice.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's legal, but for example, like I'm not saying it's official law of Dearborn, and obviously people are able to practice, their religious beliefs. I'll never stop that. However, the rabbit hole I'm going down is, and here's why I'll mention it for the audience is, sometimes we look at the union of church and state on one end, on the end of Christianity. And I'm thinking, what about if this Muslim encroachment of of church and state is going to be the ground for the backlash that goes the other way? You know what I'm saying? And then brings in the end time events we understand. You know what I mean? And so, because there is no denying what we accuse Catholicism of is lived out by Islam. If they had it their way, there'd be no religious liberty. And that's the issue. It's not whether it's happening, it's that it never really dawned on me that that's their philosophy. They're just helpless because they're such a small number. But if they were the majority, let's not kid ourselves, we wouldn't have any freedoms. Just look at every Muslim nation. That's the problem, that we excuse or we sweep under the rug that whole religious system, and yet we're so focused on Rome. How is it any different?
I mean, it's worth keeping. Like I said, it's worth talking about. And I would just say that the answer to it, right, and that's where I think is really important, is that we need to know what political philosophy we're defending, and we need to make that case. So, in other words, there's going to be people like Thomas Jefferson was very clear on this, right? Like, religious beliefs are the most personal beliefs that a person has because it's between their mind and God, right? And so that's why it's so important to stay out of it. But that's why I think it's important that we have, so like, as people are discussing, right, various political philosophies, the one that we want to defend, right, is the one of the American founding, right? That's the best that we've ever gotten at this liberty thing. And so then once we know, I feel like once we know the core, we understand what John Locke is talking about with the social compact, then we know what kind of immigration policies and what kind of laws and everything that we need to defend that type of free society, right? And so, yeah, that may mean that we're like, it doesn't mean that anyone who's a Muslim can never come here, but it means we may need to be a little more selective about people from certain parts of the world, right? Was your uncle Al Qaeda member? Yeah, we probably shouldn't come. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to, and I know you're not saying this. We don't have to go out religious liberty for everybody. I mean, I was actually just going through some documents from the American founding on different like statements or letters that various founders, including Washington, Madison, Jefferson, and I found letters from Jefferson and Washington written to, they called them Mohammedans, right, who are a very minority sect, and it said they would be full citizens of the republic. And so I do think, there have always been Muslims in America. Listen, before 9/11.
Okay, but let me ask you this question: Why do we permit Muslim call to prayers?
I mean that just depends on.
That's annoying.
Well,
like I hear it in the videos. If I'm living and I'm hearing that.
Well, it depends. I mean, when you say we allow, I mean, my town doesn't allow that. I mean, that's
no. But anywhere in the United States, what do you think a disease takes over in one shot? We ignore it in Dearborn. Then it's in Minnesota. Then it's in Texas. Then it's.
I mean, so here's what I would say, and this is where federalism comes in. Local areas can govern things differently, right? So whether or not a Muslim call to prayer is allowed, that's not an issue for Congress or state legislatures to deal with. That's really none of their business. It's up to the local community of Dearborn, right? Do the citizens of Dearborn, are they okay with that? If they're not, yeah, I mean, I think they would have. I mean, they can write their zoning laws how they want to do that. But I mean, on the flip side, right?
But that's okay. I'm just gonna push back just for I hate using. Isn't that religion infringing on people's rights? That Muslim call to prayer is not a secular activity.
Well, here's what I will say about that. It depends how far people want to go down on the strict separation view. I don't believe in what some people call the hardcore strict separation view.
Neither do I.
That religion should just not be in public life, right? You shouldn't have. I don't agree with that. And I think because it's easy for us as Christians to be opposed to the other thing. I'll just give an example that's not Muslim. So in my hometown, for years, for literally decades, right, until it was either the late 90s or the early 2000s, but for decades before that, in the public school, they had a display. No one, the town was fine with the display. I mean, this is a vastly majority Christian, whatever. Like, it wasn't anybody being forced to pray or anything like that. This is a display, and it had, I don't know exactly what the picture was, but it was Christian imagery in the picture. Nobody in our town really had a problem with that. Well, one family wound up having a problem with that. They ended up taking it, and I believe our town, I think this case went to the Supreme Court. And maybe it was just the Supreme Court of Michigan. I think it was the U.S. Supreme Court, though. I could be wrong. And basically, they came down and said, you can't have the picture. And I don't actually agree with that. The idea that all local communities can have any.
You don't see the difference, though, between a Muslim call to prayer and that picture?
Well, I see the difference in the fact that it's not a part of my religion. But, I mean, so here's the other thing.
Look, right? The picture, I have to drive by it. I have to look at it. I have to be in the vicinity. So I understand why that shouldn't be a big issue. But the Muslim call to prayer, whether I want to hear it or not, it's blasting inside my window.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say about that.
That's how I would differentiate it.
But here's what I would say about it. For me, it's not a constitutional issue. Now, the court maybe if some Christians were to take up that case and they want to argue on the grounds of this picture, I would just say, because I don't want to bolster that kind of strict separationist view that bans like any religious display from public life, right? I wouldn't attack the Muslims on this. I would say this is local community, right? Like I said, if Dearborn, Michigan, listen, I wouldn't want it in my town, right? I would show up at my town meetings and I would definitely vote against it.
But let me ask you a question. Who's in control of Dearborn, Michigan?
The residents of Dearborn, Michigan. And there's a big Muslim community. That's true. But insofar as they're citizens of Dearborn, right? Like, that's what. So if we want to push back against that, well, we need to go to the, again, I wasn't actually planning on talking about Islam this much, but to the core of our topic, we need to be preaching and evangelizing.
And that's why I bring it up, right? Because let's go back to the core of the topic, because I think I want to do this Islam thing in a couple of weeks to really flush it out even more. But here's what it says. Oops, sorry, wrong screen. Let's go to the next verse. In Proverbs, it says, wisdom shouts in the street. She lifts her voice in the square, right? At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her saying. And so to me, as I'm going down this rabbit hole, the question is, I'm 100% for religious liberty, but I'm not 100% for a mixture of church and state or Islam and state. How do we navigate that is what I'm trying to explore. You understand the difference? We wouldn't accept Christian nationalism. Why are we accepting? And I'm not saying we, but it's creeping in. Unhinged.
I would just say, I think we have the resources in our Constitution to prevent, right, the worst case scenario, which I don't think is something that we are close to at all in America. Again, I think it's
okay, but I think you're missing the point. To me, the point is not that we're there, but the philosophy is there already. If they had the majority today, there'd be no religious liberty. That's what I'm saying. Built into Islam is that notion. What will become... Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And we don't talk about that. I've noticed we don't bring that up. We talk about religious liberty, and yes, it's important, but that's the philosophical topic I'm addressing. Built into that religion is that. And you see it in every Muslim country, which is why when, the hot topic was Israel and Palestine, we don't support Israel for religious reasons. We support it for natural law and political reasons, in the sense of it's a democracy. It's the only beacon of freedom there. I spoke to people about Jesus at the Wailing Wall on the Jewish, as they call it, as we know it, the Jewish Sabbath. On Friday night, I'm talking, no threats, no, I'm going to be arrested. If I try that in Palestine, I'd be dead within 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and that's inherently in the religion. And that's what it's dawned on me, because we focus, and I'll say it again for the last time, we focus so much on Christian nationalism and that prophetic union it's going to take, and yet the other ditch goes unmentioned. Right? The devil doesn't care what ditch you fall in. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, and I think this conversation, I think it has more. It's important to know the philosophical. I think it's Robert Spencer. There's two. Richard Spencer is the white nationalist creep. No, Robert Spencer. Someone people should definitely read. He's a scholar of Islam. He's not Muslim. He's a Christian, but he's a scholar of Islam. And he's done, in what he has shown is that and this is something I think is important in this conversation. Western Muslims, right, the peaceful Muslims, and there are peaceful Muslims. There are
Yes,
Muslims
yes. No.
who helped Americans in various wars and all these things, right? There are peaceful Muslims. And this is what Robert Spencer said. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that there are peaceful Muslims. And then that we also say, listen, the peaceful Muslims, the Western Muslims, they can say to the Islamic State, that's not my Islam. But what they can't say is that that's not a legitimate form of Islam, right? Because like the Islamic State is following the Prophet Muhammad and the Hadiths and these things. So yeah, I think it's important, and I think it has more significance on understanding other countries, right? Where I think this is more of an issue. And again, it's always here. We need to make a clear line in our immigration that you have to, like I said, we're not an ethnic nation, but we are an ideas nation. If you don't agree with the ideas at the core of the nation, then this isn't for you. Let's do the last two verses.
Yeah, because I gotta go in 4 minutes. All right, this one.
Let's get a little bit more on Islam than
Yeah, yeah, but it's based on the premise though. It's based on the premise, so it's not like completely out of left field, right? How do we address these real issues in real time? I like Isaiah 58:1. Cry loudly, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their transgression, and to the house of Jacob and Esau their sins. And not Esau, Ishmael. Right? They hate him right? They hate him who reproves in the gate, and they abhor him who speaks with integrity. Hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. Perhaps the Lord God of hosts may be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. Right? And that's what we have to do on all topics. And yet, sometimes we're neutered. And I think I'm going to do a series on this and see where it takes me. Or not a series. I'm going to do some more study on this. Because to me, it's not the threat of it happening, because prophetically we know it's not going to happen. Right? But we might have more urgency to preach the gospel to Muslims if we understood philosophically how not only religious, but philosophically, it's contrary to scripture and the fact that it would impose a union of church and state, which we see in prophetically in in Revelation 13. So it's imbibing the same spirit of Revelation 13. And yet we don't bring it up. All right, last one. Here is the perseverance.
I was just going to say this in the context of the last verse and the verses we read about speaking truth in the public square. This is actually something where one of the reasons why Islam is growing is because, for all their faults, and there's many, they're a religion of boldness, right? And so, like in England, I'm seeing all these videos of young Islamic men, including some white British men who converted to Islam, in the streets like haram, haram, like you're sitting this. In other words, and I'm not saying necessarily we should take their approach, but they do have a kind of boldness for spreading their message that we should probably have at least their energy level for proclaiming what is actually true.
Yeah, and this is not a hindrance. So nobody take this the wrong way. But because we are to preach in love, it mitigates, our approach is never going to be as bold and bombastic as those who just jump in your face like yelling haram, haram. Know what I mean? Because that's rude, period, right? And we're more persuasive. We let the Holy Spirit lead out. And so it looks like they're running circles around us, but in reality, we have Holy Spirit power that sometimes takes longer because we know the heart is deceitful above all else. Go ahead.
I will say, I think that's a situational thing, right? Generally speaking, I think you're right. Right now, but I also think, right, that Jesus, right, the man who explained perfect, like it was the perfect balance of truth and love, He
Mhm.
also, when dealing with people in authority, spoke quite harshly. He
Oh, yes,
literally,
Matthew 23.
fashioned whips and physically overturned the money changers'
Mhm.
tables
Yeah.
temple with a whip, right? And so, listen, I think when we're say addressing, and I'll just make a good example, like on abortion, when we're addressing, a young woman who either she's had an abortion and she's feeling guilty, or like she's thinking about it, right? That is the time where you put your arm around her and you say, "Hey, we're here for you. You don't want to do this.
Mhm.
Like, we know
Yeah.
the truth that this would be, not a good thing." But it's not, that's not a moment for harshness.
No, of
Now,
course not.
there are, I'm trying to think, of a good example, but like, okay, here's a good example. If you know that one of the leaders in the church is beating his wife behind
Oh,
closed
of
doors,
course, yes, yeah.
that's a moment for some of that like boldness time,
Yeah,
and
woe
maybe
unto
even,
you, leader of the church, for you
yeah,
tithe and yet you beat your wife. Of course, that's the time. Yeah, there's a time and place for everything. But the example you use of the young man in the middle of the street screaming haram, he's doing it at a fellow citizen. Do that
yeah,
to a leader. Now, this could be a whole nother topic. Look, some of the sins that Islam cries out against Christianity, they're right because it's a false version of Christianity. Like they wouldn't scream that at us Seventh Day Adventists. Tell you that much, right? The ones that scream about pork and alcohol and all that, they wouldn't do that to us, right? Because we're people of the book and we understand that that stuff is offensive to God, not to Islam, but to God Himself. All right, brother, I gotta go. I'll give you the last word. I got an
well, let's do
early
the last two
morning.
verses. They're short verses, so
Okay,
Amos 5:10-15, and then Revelation 14:12. Do we have Amos
Amos.
first?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead. It's
Want me to
Amos
read it?
five
It was
ten
5:10 and verse 15,
15.
so not
All right, go ahead.
true, but both. So Amos 5:10, they hate him who reproves in the gate, and they abhor him who speaks with integrity. And in 15, hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. Perhaps the Lord God of hosts may be gracious to the remnant of Joseph.
Let me say
And so what
something
I,
here real quick
yeah,
because I want to give you the last word, right? Hate evil. Remember, when we talk about Catholicism, we're not talking about the people, we're talking about the system. So to me, it's the same way with Islam. Hate evil, the system. Love good, love the people, right? Establish justice in the gate. Perhaps the Lord of God may be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. Remember, you and I are called to be the watchmen on the wall. If we don't warn the people about the mixture of church and state, whether on the left or on the right, right? What are we doing, right? Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say on that, about we may not, the first verse in verse 10, right, where it said, right, they hate those who do it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there has to be some comfortability, comfortability, comfortness with being
We need to
disliked.
be, yeah, we need to be comfortable with being disliked.
No. And then the last verse, Revelation 14:12.
You know, before you go there, it reminds me of
Right.
C.D. Brooks, where he says, the problem with many of us is that we long to be popular, right? And it's not about popularity, it's about faithfulness to God. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Revelation 14:12, and I'll read this one. Here is
Mm-hmm.
the perseverance of the saints. Here of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. Right? And the reason why I thought that was important is because there are some Christians, right, in our denomination, right, who have a lot of zeal for the Sabbath, and we should have zeal for the Sabbath because this is God's
Mm-hmm.
holy day. I'm actually can't wait for my book by Charlie Kirk to get here.
Yeah.
I have it ordered,
W-
but
When does yours come in? Mine comes in tomorrow.
next week, early next week. I
Okay.
ordered it kind of late, so
Yeah.
but so that's very important. And I want to say, don't tone down the zeal about the Sabbath at all. But I think it's really important, right? James said, right, if you offend in one point of the law, you offend in them all, right? So all the law is equally important, right? And this is the other thing, right? So because sometimes our religious liberty, right, well, we're really good about standing for religious liberty for everybody as a church. But here's the thing. what we understand about the Ten Commandments, right? That the first four being about our relationship with God and the government not having any just jurisdiction over them, and then the last six being about our relationship with man and the government having a responsibility to have just laws in accordance with the last six,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, both things are equally true. So, in other words, a government that tries to enforce the first tablet of law, that is an unjust government that we
Mm-hmm.
should oppose. But also, a government which rejects the last six commandments of the law, that is also an unjust government that we should oppose. And there are
Mm-hmm.
some Adventists who are really good about one kind of unjust government, but we don't call out another. And by the way, I don't think that's a majority, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I know plenty of Adventists who've defended religious liberty rights of on the conservative side and against encroachments by the LGBT community. But I think it's important to remember that, and this was, and I think it's interesting, and I think we're going to have to explore this more, the Islamic connection.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't come into this conversation as prepared for that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it in the context of secular, like the left wing and the amorality and like the sexual immorality
Mm-hmm.
that we don't, right? The kind of those degradations of the law, right? But it's good to talk about, because Islam, I would say, their kind of unjust government is more one in the first category, right? They want to
Mm-hmm.
enforce things that the government has no authority to enforce.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess what I was thinking of is like, but either way, and this is why I wrote here in my notes, I said, in love, stand for all truth, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that means that in the public square, we do tell the truth about our disagreements with Islam, and that we do preach Jesus Christ, right? Like it's all important, but that includes, a turning away from all sin, right? So whether it's abortion or pornography, or I'll say it, this is another one of the social ones, right? Internet gambling, right?
Yeah.
Sports betting, right? These things are wreaking. And one of the reasons why I think it's crucial, right? And this is the conversation that prompted me to want to have this topic. I had a conversation on Facebook with a fellow Adventist brother, and he said something, and he's into evangelization. I like this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he said something about no one has ever come to the truth, or has ever come to the gospel, given their life to Christ because of a sermon about abortion or because of pro-life advocacy. And I know that's not true, because I'm in pro-life circles. I know people who have come to the faith through that.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, it's like, yeah, that goes against what even Mrs. White says, right? She says that the method of Christ is that he mingled with men as one who desired their good. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what is the good of the unborn? Can they ever accept the three angels' messages if they're killed in their mother's womb? Can
Mm-hmm.
they ever make a decision for Jesus if they're killed in their mother's womb? Now, I don't believe Jesus judges them guilty for that,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But like, you can't hear the gospel and you can't have religious freedom if you're dead, right? Also,
Mercy.
if you're a woman, right, who does this, statistics are very clear that the majority of people who get abortion wind up dealing with like post-abortive stress and depression, and especially years down the line, guilt, and these things are common. But if we were lovingly there, right? And here's the thing: Seventh-day Adventists are great at building institutions, right? We have medical institutions, education ones. So when we value a thing, we can build institutions to deal with it. But so we could have, since 1973, we could have established one of the world's best system of pro-life pregnancy centers,
Yeah.
right, to help people in crisis. But because we saw that, well, maybe that's not our fight or whatever. And so I would just say it is important to speak for all truth. And in closing, I'll bring the Chloe Cole example. Something that Chloe Cole, the detransitioner, she was transitioned as a young girl. She ended up, before she was even 18, having both of her healthy breasts mutilated, cut off by surgeons in an attempt to try to make her appear to be a male. And in the process, and she's obviously detransitioned, she now is an advocate against, right, the gender dysphoria or the gender mutilation people. But something she said on the Jordan Peterson podcast really stuck with me, and I think the church needs to take this to heart. She said, "How come nobody told me the truth?
Mm-hmm.
How come nobody warned me? How come nobody loved me enough to tell me that, hey, that I would never, that I was forever, getting rid of my ability to nurse a child, potentially to ever have a child, right? Like, how come nobody told me the truth?" And then I see, listen, I was a kid doing the Harry Potter panic, and I'm not endorsing Harry Potter,
Mm.
but I see J.K. Rowling, and I've seen her express a lot more courage on this issue and protecting vulnerable children than a lot of her Christian critics. Right? Richard Dawkins now is being, one of the louder advocates against it. Right? I think of, in COVID, how Joe Rogan ended up, just punk rock, not punk rock, but like this kind of, hippie, tattooed, guy who likes drugs, ended up becoming one of the loudest voices for liberty of conscience, right? And so, I mean, listen, I appreciate these people who take a stand. I appreciate courage wherever I see it. But as Christians, all the more we should be in the public square standing for truth, standing for liberty, right? Like, we should not let, to go back to the one verse, do not let truth stumble in the gate or stumble in the market on our watch.
Yep. On that note, I gotta go, bro. You owe me some 15 minutes, bro. I'm gonna be like dead tired at 4:40 in the morning.
That's because of the Islam conversation. We got derailed. That's okay.
On that note, have a good night on the Gio and Joey Show. Be blessed.